Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, you are in for something truly special today. This story has everything: humiliation, redemption, a shocking twist, and a message that I promise will stay with you long after the video ends. Before we dive in, if stories like this move you, stories about dignity, strength, and the moment the truth finally comes out, hit that like right now and subscribe so you never miss one. We post new stories every week, and trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming. Okay. The morning that would change everything began the way most mornings in Sarah Cohen's life did. Quietly, practically, and without any indication that the universe was about to deliver something extraordinary. She walked through the revolving glass doors of the Meridian Grand Hotel in Tel Aviv, carrying a tray of coffee in one hand and a binder of vendor invoices in the other. She wore her uniform, a pale blue button-down shirt tucked into dark navy trousers, sensible shoes with rubber soles that squeaked slightly on the polished marble floors. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and there was a small stain near the hem of her collar that she had tried, unsuccessfully, to blot out before her shift. She was 34 years old. She had worked in this hotel for 6 years, first as a front desk associate, then as an assistant events coordinator, and now, officially, as the hotel's full-time events supervisor, though the title on her badge still read staff, because the new name badges hadn't come in yet. Small indignities like that had long since stopped bothering her. What did bother her, what had always bothered her, was being made invisible. Not ignored. Not overlooked by accident. Deliberately erased, as if she were furniture in a room full of people who had decided, without asking, that she did not count. She was used to it. That didn't mean she liked it. The Meridian Grand was one of the finest hotels in the city, a gleaming tower of glass and ambition that catered to businesspeople, diplomats, celebrities, and the kind of ultra-wealthy guests who booked entire floors and had teams of personal assistants who arrived 24 hours before them to arrange the flower arrangements. Sarah had seen it all: the rock stars who trashed their rooms, the tech moguls who demanded the temperature be set to exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit and then complained it was too cold, the foreign dignitaries who were polite to their staff and rude to everyone else, and the billionaires, the real ones, the kind whose names appeared in headlines and whose faces appeared on magazine covers, who swept through the lobby as though the very air around them had been reserved in advance. She had learned to read these people the way a sailor reads the sky. And so when she stepped off the elevator on the 14th floor that Tuesday morning to check on the setup for the afternoon's corporate gala, and she saw the man standing in the hallway barking into his phone, she knew immediately what she was dealing with. He was tall, broad-shouldered. He wore a navy suit that had clearly been made to measure, and on his wrist was a watch that probably cost more than Sarah's entire annual salary. His hair was dark and swept back, and even from 20 feet away she could see that his face was handsome in the cruel, angular way of someone who had never been told no. He was speaking in rapid Hebrew, a language she knew extremely well, as it happened, and what he was saying, interspersed with English business terms and frustrated sighs, was that the event space was inadequate, the florist had sent the wrong arrangements, and someone, he didn't specify who, was, in his words, an absolute incompetent who should never have been trusted with something this important. Sarah paused for just a moment. She did not speak, she listened. "This is a disaster," he said in Hebrew, pacing. "I told them specifically, no lilies. My business partner is allergic to lilies. Does no one in this country read instructions anymore? And the lighting is terrible. I can see the extension cord running along the wall. It looks like a student production, not a gala for an international acquisition announcement. Where is the manager? Where is anyone with a brain?" He turned and saw Sarah standing there with her binder and her tray of coffees. His eyes swept over her, the stain on the collar, the rubber-soled shoes, the staff badge, and dismissed her in approximately 1 second. He spoke to her in Hebrew, which she would later reflect, was either a mistake born of assumption, or a deliberate choice made for the same reason. Either way, it revealed something important. "You," he said, Are you part of the setup crew? I'm the event supervisor, she said in English. He switched back to Hebrew without missing a beat, turning slightly away from her so he was half speaking to her, and half still looking at his phone. Then you should know that everything in that room is wrong. The flowers need to go. The lighting is amateur. And I want to speak to someone who can actually fix these problems. Not someone who just carries coffee around and nods at people. He said the last part with a small, dismissive laugh. The kind that is meant to be heard by the person it's about, to make sure they understand their place. He said it in Hebrew, clearly assuming she didn't understand. Clearly assuming she was, as he had decided in that first sweeping glance, simply a local employee who would smile and fetch someone more important. Sarah set the coffee tray down on the credenza beside her. She opened her binder to the event page for that afternoon's gala. She looked up at him and she said, in fluent, flawless Hebrew, with a Tel Aviv accent, no less, slightly warmer than his own clipped northern dialect, the lilies have already been replaced. I spoke to the florist at 7 this morning when I reviewed the order against your team's submitted allergy list. The extension cord you're referring to has been rerouted, and will be concealed behind the panel installation that begins in 40 minutes. And the lighting configuration you were sent in the design brief last Thursday was approved by your assistant, whose name is Yale, at 3:14 in the afternoon. I have the email thread if you'd like to see it. She paused, and then, because she had been invisible for a long time and she was tired of it, she added, also, the coffee in the middle cup is yours. Double espresso, no sugar. Your assistant included it in your dietary preferences when she sent the event brief. I made sure it was ready for when you arrived. The silence that followed was one of the most satisfying things Sarah Cohen had ever experienced in her professional life. The man, whose name was Daniel Harari, as she already knew from the event brief, CEO of Harari Global Ventures, net worth estimated approximately $3 billion, recently named one of the 30 most powerful people in Israeli tech, stared at her. His phone had lowered to his side. His jaw had not quite dropped. But it had done something very close to it. The dismissive confidence had not vanished, men like him rarely let that happen completely. But it had cracked. And through the crack, something else was visible. Something that looked almost like embarrassment, and almost like respect, and was very clearly the dawning realization that he had made a significant miscalculation. You speak Hebrew? He said in Hebrew. I do, she said. In Hebrew. And you understood everything I said? Every word. Another pause. He looked at her differently now, not with warmth not yet, but with the cautious, recalibrating attention of someone who has discovered that the terrain they were walking on is not what they assumed it was. I owe you an apology, he said. His voice was flatter now, the arrogance dampened slightly by something that might have been genuine discomfort. Sarah picked up the coffee tray. The gala setup will be complete by noon. If there are any other concerns about the arrangements, I'll be in the event space from 10 o'clock onward. Please feel free to come and see for yourself. She walked away, and she did not look back. The event space looked extraordinary by noon. Sarah had been in hospitality long enough to know that the difference between a good event and a great one often came down to things no one consciously noticed. The height at which the floral arrangements sat relative to the eyeline of a standing guest. The warmth of the ambient lighting against the specific shade of white used in the linens. The exact angle at which the printed place cards were folded so they caught the light just right. These details were invisible when they were done correctly. They only became visible when they were wrong. Most people, in Sarah's experience, never appreciated the invisible work. They simply walked into a beautiful room, and felt beautiful in it, and never stopped to think about who had made it that way. She was doing a final walkthrough when Daniel Harari arrived with his team, 40 minutes before the gala was scheduled to begin. There were 3 people with him. 2 men in suits and a young woman with a tablet who was presumably Yale, the assistant. He stopped at the entrance of the room and looked around. And Sarah watched from across the space as his expression shifted. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said something quietly to the woman with the tablet. The woman nodded, made a note. He walked across the room toward Sarah. She waited. She had been waiting for this, in a way, though she had told herself she hadn't. "It looks good," he said. His tone was different from the hallway. Still contained, still careful. He was not a man who gushed or effused. But there was something genuine in it. "Better than I expected." "Thank you," she said. He looked at her for a moment. She had the sense he was deciding something. "I was rude to you this morning." "Yes," she agreed. "You were." He blinked. He had perhaps expected her to deflect, to say it was fine. To offer him the easy absolution that people in service roles often reflexively provide even when it isn't meant. She did not do that. "I assumed things I shouldn't have," he said. "You assumed I wouldn't understand what you were saying," she said. "Which also meant you assumed it didn't matter if I heard it." He held her gaze. There was something complicated moving behind his eyes, the internal negotiation, she suspected, of a very proud man confronting the fact that he had been small. "I was wrong," he said. "You were," she said again and then. Because she was not actually a person who held grudges, and the room looked wonderful, and she was genuinely proud of what her team had accomplished, she added. "The gala will go well. Your guests will be impressed. And I hope your business partner has no trouble with the flowers." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. "I didn't get your name," he said. "Sarah," she said. He nodded slowly. Something flickered across his face, a thought, a recognition, something, but it passed before she could read it. "Mr. Harari," he said, extending his hand. "I know," she said, and she shook it. He left to join his team. Sarah went back to her clipboard. The room looked beautiful, the flowers were perfect. The lights were warm and golden and exactly right. And somewhere in the back of her mind, in a place she wasn't quite ready to look at directly, something had shifted. The gala was a success. It was by every measurable metric: guest feedback, the smooth coordination of the catering and AV teams, the timing of the speeches, the absence of any of the 17 problems Sarah had quietly solved in the 72 hours leading up to it, a resounding success. At 11:30, when the final guests were drifting toward the exits, and the catering staff began their quiet, efficient clearing of the tables, Sarah was in the corridor outside the event space going over her post-event checklist when she heard her name. Daniel Harari was standing at the doorway. His jacket was off, his tie loosened. He had, she thought, the look of a man who had spent the evening performing, and was only now letting himself stop. "Sarah." She turned. "Mr. Harari, the gala was excellent," he said. "My team is very impressed." "Thank you. Your guests seem to enjoy themselves." He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with that same complicated expression from that morning. Then he said, "I asked about you. At the front desk. I asked about the woman who had supervised the event." She said nothing, waiting. "They told me you've been working here for 6 years," he said. "They told me you speak 6 languages: Hebrew, English, Arabic, French, Mandarin, and Spanish. They told me you have a master's degree in international hospitality management from the University of Geneva. They told me that last year you coordinated an event for the Minister of Finance, and were personally thanked in his office's press release." He paused. "They also told me they were planning to promote you to head of events next month." Sarah looked at him steadily. "Is there a question in there somewhere?" He almost smiled again. "Why are you still here?" he said. "With those credentials, with that background, you could be running events for an international corporation. You could be the director of hospitality at a 5-star property in Paris or New York. Why are you still a supervisor in a hotel in Tel Aviv?" It was a good question. It was, in fact, the question she had been asking herself with increasing frequency over the past year. She answered it the way she had answered it in her own mind. Which was the only honest way to answer it. "Because I grew up 3 kilometers from this hotel," she said. "Because my mother worked in hospitality her whole life and retired without anyone ever knowing her name. Because I came back here after Geneva specifically to make this place into something she would have been proud of. Because for the last 6 years, I have been building something quietly, and it's almost finished." She paused. And because in 6 months, the ownership group that runs this hotel is accepting bids to appoint a new general manager. And I intend to submit one. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face had changed. The armor was still there, she suspected it was always there. But there were gaps in it now, real ones. And through them she could see someone who was genuinely, unexpectedly interested. That's an ambitious goal, he said. Yes, she said. It is. You'll get it, he said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was more like a statement of fact from a man who had spent his career assessing people and knew one when he saw one. She turned back to her clipboard. Good night, Mr. Harari. Good night, Sarah Cohen, he said. And then very quietly, almost to himself, he added something in Hebrew. It was a phrase she knew well, an old phrase, from the Talmud, about how you recognize the worth of something only when you have nearly missed seeing it. She did not respond. But she heard it. And she carried it home with her that night, turning it over in her mind like a smooth stone, unsure yet what it meant. But knowing, in the way you sometimes know things before you can explain them, that something had begun. There is a version of this story where Sarah Cohen is simply a competent woman who impressed an arrogant and earned his respect through sheer professional excellence. That version is true. But it is not the complete truth. The complete truth required going back further, much further. Sarah Miriam Cohen had been born in Tel Aviv 34 years earlier, the only child of Rivka Cohen, who had spent 32 years working in the laundry and housekeeping departments of various hotels across the city, and of a father who was not part of the story except by absence. Rivka had raised her daughter on coffee and ambition, and the firm conviction that the world owed you nothing and hard owed you everything, which Sarah had absorbed so completely that it had become something like a second skeleton. What Sarah had not told Daniel Harari, what she had not told most people, was that the name Cohen was not the whole name. Her mother had shortened it, as many did, when they came to Israel, the full name, the original name. The name that appeared on the documents Sarah had found in a box, in her mother's closet after Rika died of a stroke 4 years ago, was Cohen Mizrahi. And the Mizrahi half of that name, the half that had been quietly tucked away for practicality and assimilation and the desire to fit in, a country where certain surnames carried weight and others carried history, traced directly back, through a lineage of rabbis and scholars and one remarkably well-documented family tree, to a man named Avner Mizrahi, who had been, in the early 20th century, one of the founding figures of the modern Israeli hospitality industry. Avner Mizrahi had built the first luxury hotel in what was then Ottoman Palestine. Not the first boarding house, not the first traveler's rest. The first real hotel, with marble floors and a dining room and a piano in the lobby, built in 1912 and open to great fanfare and considerable controversy, because nothing of its kind had existed there before. The hotel had been destroyed in the violence of 948 and rebuilt twice. The family had scattered and reassembled and scattered again. The name had fractured across generations like light through a prism, coming through in pieces. A cousin here, an aunt there, until Rivka Cohen, practical and exhausted and done with the weight of legacy, had simply let the Mizrahi part go quiet. Sarah had found all of this in the box. The photographs, the documents, a handwritten letter in beautiful old-fashioned Hebrew from Avner Mizrahi himself, addressed to his grandchildren, written in 1956, about what it meant to welcome a stranger into a space you had built, about the sacred nature of hospitality, about how the Hebrew word for guest, orek, was related to the word for path, because a guest was always someone on a journey. And your role was to honor that journey. She had sat on her mother's floor and read that letter 3 times. And then she had put everything back in the box and carried it home and made a decision. Not a one she announced or explained. Just a quiet, iron, certainty decision, the kind that doesn't require witnesses. She was going to finish what Avner had started. She was going to build something in this city that honored the legacy she had inherited, without ever knowing she had it. She was going to become the best hospitality professional in Israel. And she was going to do it as herself, under her own name, on her own merits, without waving the family story around like a flag. She had not yet told anyone about the box. Not her coworkers, not her closest friends. Not the hotel ownership group she was hoping to impress with her general manager bid. And she had not. Sitting in the corridor outside the gala event space at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, told Daniel Harari. She would tell him, eventually. But not yet. Not until she knew why it mattered that she did. He came back 3 weeks later. She was in the middle of a walk through the hotel's rooftop terrace, which was being considered for a renovation, when Yale, his assistant, called ahead to let the front desk know that Mr. Harari would be arriving that afternoon and had requested to speak with the event's supervisor. Sarah finished her walk through at her own pace. Then she went to the small office adjacent to the event spaces, straightened her jacket, and waited. He arrived at 3:15. He was less formally dressed than the last time, open collar, no tie, and he was alone, no team, no Yale. He knocked on the open door even though it was already open. "Do you have a minute?" he said. "I have a few," she said. He sat down across from her. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been rehearsing something and wasn't entirely sure the rehearsal had been sufficient. For all his confidence, for all the armor of wealth and accomplishment, and the easy assumption of authority, there was something slightly uncomfortable about him in this moment. She found she liked him better for it. "I'm submitting a bid," he said. She looked at him. "For the general manager position," he said. "Not me personally. My group. Harari Global Ventures has a hospitality division. We're interested in acquiring the Meridian Grand or at minimum in being appointed to manage it under the ownership group's restructuring. And I would like to propose that you be named as part of our management team. Director of Events and Guest Experience, reporting directly to the general manager." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You want to give me a job?" "I want to offer you a role," he said. "There's a difference. A job is something you do, a role is something you build. That's a fine distinction." "I mean it," he said. "I've done my research. I've looked at the events you've managed, the feedback scores, the retention rates among the vendors and suppliers you work with. I've spoken to 3 separate department heads, who all said some version of the same thing, which is that this hotel runs as well as it does largely because of you. You are, whether the title reflects it or not, already functioning at the level of a senior director. I want to give you the formal structure to match that reality." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. There were things she wanted to say, questions she wanted to ask. But what came out first was something simpler and more honest. "Why are you here, Daniel?" He was quiet for a moment. She had used his first name without intending to, it had slipped out, and it had shifted something in the room, made the air a little thinner. He noticed it. She noticed him noticing it. "Because I was wrong," he said. 3 weeks ago. I walked into this hotel, and I looked at you and I made a series of assumptions, based on what I could see of a surface. And every single one of them was wrong. And I have been thinking about that a lot since then." He paused. "I have built my career on being a good judge of people. I pride myself on it. And I walked right past one of the most capable people in this building because she was carrying a coffee tray, and had a stain on her collar." "A small stain," Sarah said. "A small stain," he agreed. "And I have spent the last 3 weeks trying to figure out what that says about me." "What did you conclude?" He exhaled. "That I have a blind spot," he said. "That I see what I expect to see. That success has made me lazy in certain ways, that I wasn't when I was starting out. When I had nothing and I had to read every person in every room carefully. Because I couldn't afford to miss anything." He looked at her directly. "I don't like that conclusion. But I think it's true." Sarah was quiet. Then she said, "There's something I should tell you." He waited. She reached into her desk drawer and took out a manila envelope. She had brought it from home that morning, not knowing entirely why, or perhaps knowing exactly why and choosing not to examine it too closely. She opened it and laid the contents on the desk between them. The photographs. The documents. The letter. "My mother's family name was Mizrahi," she said. She shortened it. She never talked about why or about where it came from. "When she died, I found these." She watched him look at the photographs, at the one at the top of the pile. A man in formal dress standing in front of a hotel that no longer existed, in a city that had not yet become what it was. His name was Avner Mizrahi. He built the first luxury hotel in this country in 1912. He wrote that letter, she pointed to it, about hospitality. About what it means to open a door for someone. Daniel stared at the photograph. His expression had changed completely. He looked up at her. "You're Avner Mizrahi's granddaughter." "Great-great-granddaughter," she said. "Technically, Sarah," he said, and his voice was different now. There was something in it she hadn't heard before. Something closer to wonder than anything she had expected from him. "Avner Mizrahi is required reading in Israeli hospitality management programs. The letter you just showed me. There are excerpts of that letter displayed in the lobby of the Bezalel Academy of Arts and Design. He is considered one of the founding figures of." "I know," she said quietly. "I know who he was. I've known for 4 years, I've been trying to figure out what to do with it." He looked at her for a long time. She could see him recalibrating again, the way he had in the hallway 3 weeks ago, but deeper this time, more significant. More personal. "You've been working toward this your entire career," he said. "Without ever mentioning this, without waving it around," she said. "Yes, because I want what I build to be mine. Not a legacy I inherited. Mine. Built on what I actually do." She looked at him steadily. "The same way you built your company. Without a family name opening doors for you." He looked at her for a long moment. "You know about that," he said. "I know that Daniel Harari started as a systems analyst at 22. That he built his first startup with $40,000 he borrowed from a former professor, and that his family did not have money." She said. "Yes. I did my research too." The silence between them was different now. Not the silence of a confrontation or an assessment, but something warmer and more complicated. The silence of two people who had, without planning to, shown each other something true. "I want to make a proposal," he said finally. "A real one. Not just the corporate offer. Hear me out." She waited. "Harari Global Ventures is going to submit a bid for the management contract on this hotel," he said. "I want you to co-author that bid with me. Not as my employee. As a partner. The bid would include a proposal to rename the hotel," he paused, "the Mizrahi Grand. In honor of the legacy that built this industry." Sarah sat very still. "You would be named as Director of Hospitality and Culture. With a path to General Manager within 18 months contingent on performance metrics we would define together," he said. "I would bring the capital and the corporate infrastructure. You would bring everything else, which, as I've established over the past 3 weeks, is considerable." He met her eyes. "And we would do it right. We would put Avner Mizrahi's name back on the map, not as a PR stunt. As a genuine honoring of what he started." She looked at the photograph on the desk. The man in the formal dress standing in front of his hotel. Squinting slightly in the bright early sun of a very young country. Looking out at something the camera couldn't capture. Something only he could see. She thought about her mother, who had carried his name quietly for decades and set it down. She thought about the box in her closet. She thought about the letter. She looked up at Daniel Harari. "I'll need to review any bid documentation before it's submitted," she said. "Of course. I'll want final approval on any naming decisions." "Agreed. And I want the general manager path in writing. Not contingent on performance metrics we define together. I define them. You agree to them." "That's the Sikh smiled." "Agreed," he said. She picked up the letter and put it back in the envelope. "Then I'll think about it," she said. "And I'll give you an answer by Friday." She thought about it for approximately 4 hours. Then she called him and said yes. The next 8 months were the hardest and most extraordinary of Sarah Cohen's life. The bid process was brutal. There were 4 other competing groups submitting proposals for the Meridian Grand Management contract. 2 of them with significantly more capital and longer track records in luxury hospitality management. The ownership group, a consortium of 3 families who had held the property for decades, was cautious, conservative, and initially quite skeptical of the Harari Cohen proposal, which was by far the most unconventional of the submissions. Most bids of this kind were built around financial projections, renovation plans, brand partnerships, and management team credentials. The Harari-Cohen bid included all of that. It also included something none of the other bids had. A 40-page cultural vision document, written almost entirely by Sarah, that laid out a philosophy of hospitality, rooted in the original vision of Avner Mizrahi. The idea that a hotel was not simply a place to sleep but a place to be welcomed. That the guest's dignity was the first thing you protected. And the last thing you compromised. That every staff member who touched the guest experience was a custodian of something sacred. And that the highest aspiration of any hospitality establishment was to make a stranger feel, for the duration of their stay, as though they belonged. It was. The ownership consortium agreed privately among themselves. The best piece of writing any of them. In a bid proposal in 30 years of reviewing them. It was also, they noted, clearly the work of someone who had been thinking about this not for weeks or months, but for years. For a lifetime. There was a presentation. Sarah spoke for 20 minutes without notes. She showed them the photograph with Avner Mizrahi. She read 3 sentences from his letter. She did not oversell, did not perform, did not try to impress. She simply told the truth about what she intended to build and why. And she did it with a clarity and quiet conviction that left the room slightly changed. The vote was unanimous. The Harari-Cohen proposal was accepted. The contract was signed. The hotel would be renamed. A renovation timeline was approved. And Sarah Miriam Cohen was formally appointed Director of Hospitality and Culture, of what the renovation was complete. The Mizrahi Grand Hotel. She called her mother's best friend, a woman named Dina who had known Rivka for 40 years, and told her. Dina cried for 10 minutes, then she said, in the way that old Israeli women sometimes say things, flat and warm and utterly certain, "Your mother knew. She always knew you would do something like this. She just didn't know what shape it would take." Sarah sat on her apartment floor with the phone in her hand after the call ended. She did not cry. She had learned a long time ago to save the feeling for later, to put it somewhere she could find it again when she needed it. She would find it again many times over the months that followed. The renovation took 5 months. In those 5 months, Sarah did not sleep much. She was on site almost every day, overseeing the construction, working with the design team, fighting for every detail that mattered. The warm limestone flooring in the lobby that referenced the original stonework of Avner's first hotel, which she had found in old photographs and brought to the designers as a reference. The hand-lettered quotation from his letter, that she had approved to be installed, in Hebrew and English, on the wall behind the front desk. The deliberate choice to hire staff from every background the city had to offer, Jewish, Arab, Ethiopian, Russian, Druze, American, Filipino. And to invest in their training the way good employers rarely did. With mentorship and language support and a genuine articulated expectation of dignity in every direction. She also fought, more than once, with Daniel. He was not easy to work with. She had known this fairly early. Suspected it even before she knew him at all. But it became concrete in the months of construction. He moved fast. He thought in terms of efficiency and return on investment and market positioning. He did not always see the point of the slower, less quantifiable things she insisted on, the extra 2 weeks she spent consulting with the design team. On the exact shade of the lobby lighting. The additional training day she added to the staff onboarding program. The handwritten welcome notes she wanted placed in every guest room, rather than the printed card, the operations team had proposed. They argued about these things with the focused, heated energy of people who respect and disagree out loud. Sometimes he won. More often she did. She was, as he had noted at the beginning, formidably good at making a case, and she had the advantage of always knowing exactly what she was talking about, down to the research that supported it, and the examples that illustrated it. He had the advantage of knowing when he was outmatched and being willing, grudgingly, to acknowledge it. "You should have been a lawyer," he said once. Late on a Thursday evening, when they had been arguing for an hour about the guest feedback system she wanted to implement. "I am a lawyer," she said. "I just practice in a different court." He looked at her for a moment with that expression she had come to know. The one where he was recalibrating again, adjusting his picture of her to accommodate a new piece of information. "You're going to be impossible to manage," he said. Not angrily. Almost admiringly. "I'm not going to be managed," she said. "I'm going to be consulted, which is different." I remember," he said. He almost smiled. Then, he looked away, and there was something in the moment that was quieter and more personal than their usual register. Something they had both been carefully not saying for several months. "The hotel is going to be extraordinary," he said. It sounded like something else. "Yes," she said. It sounded like something else too. She drove home that night thinking about how strange it was, how genuinely uncomplicatedly strange. That the man who had started this whole story, by mocking her in a language he assumed she didn't speak, by dismissing her in a hallway with a laugh he meant her to hear, had become the person she spent more hours a day with than anyone else in her life. Had become someone who challenged her, who frustrated her, who occasionally, and against all his instincts, listened to her. Who had looked at her with something very close to awe the day she stood in front of the ownership consortium and spoke about Avner Mizrahi. And who had said afterward, quietly and without performance, "I've never heard anyone speak about their work like that." She thought about what her mother would have made of all this. Rivka Cohen, who had pressed other people's linens for 30 years and come home with tired hands and a quiet pride. Who had given her daughter every book she ever asked for, and enrolled her in every language class the neighborhood could offer, and said, more than once, in the way that mothers say the things that matter, "You are going to open doors, Habibti. I don't know which doors. But you are going to open them." She was opening them. That was true. What was also true, and what she was only beginning to let herself fully feel, was that she had not opened them alone. The Mizrahi Grand Hotel opened on a Thursday in spring, when the city smelled of jasmine and salt, and the sky was the particular deep blue that Tel Aviv reserves for the most important days. The lobby was warm and luminous. The limestone floors caught the morning light and spread it in patterns that looked almost like writing. The wall behind the front desk bore, in clean hand-lettered Hebrew and English, 3 sentences from Avner Mizrahi's 1956 letter. The guest arrives carrying the weight of their journey. Your task is not to lift that weight, but to make it feel, for a time, like something shared. That is the whole of hospitality. The flowers were perfect. The staff were ready, calm. Proud in a way that was visible not in their posture exactly but in their eyes, the look of people who had been told, sincerely and repeatedly, that they mattered. The press were there. The ownership consortium was there. Several of the city's most prominent business and cultural figures were there. Because Daniel Harari had made the calls and pulled the weight he had always been very good at pulling. And because the story of the hotel, the naming, the history, the granddaughter of Avner Mizrahi coming home, had spread in the quiet, exponential way that good stories spread, and people had wanted to be part of it. Sarah stood at the entrance to the lobby 15 minutes before the official opening, wearing a dark green dress that had belonged to her mother, and fit her exactly right. And she looked at everything she had built. And she felt something she did not have a precise word for. Not pride exactly, though it was part of it, and not grief exactly, though that was part of it too. And not love exactly, though she was not sure, standing there in the morning light, that she could honestly say it wasn't any of those things. Daniel found her there. He came to stand beside her. They were both quiet for a moment, looking at the room. Your mother would have loved this, he said. He had learned about Rivka over the months of working together, about the laundry department, the tired hands, the books, the language classes. He said it carefully, the way he said all the things he genuinely meant, as if they required handling. She would have stood right here, Sarah said. She would have looked at the floors and said they needed polishing. He laughed. A real laugh, not the guarded one. She had heard it more and more over the past several months, and she had come to recognize it as laugh of the man behind the armor. Are you ready? He said. She looked at the lobby, at the light on the limestone, at the letter on the wall. At the staff at the front desk. Young and eager and trained the way she had insisted they be trained, not just in procedure but in philosophy. In the radical idea that every person who walked through those doors was worth genuine, unhurried attention. "I've been ready my whole life," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. Something passed between them that was wordless and specific, and had nothing to do with the hotel. Except that the hotel had made it possible. "Then let's open the doors," he said. She walked to the entrance. She turned the heavy brass handle. She opened the doors. The people came in. And the hotel began. There is an ending to this story, and it is not the opening of the hotel. Though the opening is the moment everything the story was building toward became real. The real ending is quieter. It happened 6 weeks after the opening. On a Tuesday morning that was, in many superficial ways, almost identical to the Tuesday morning on which everything had begun. Except that Sarah was not carrying a coffee tray. She was in her office, reviewing an event proposal. When one of the junior staff knocked and said that a guest in the lobby was asking for the director. She went out to the lobby. An older woman was standing near the front desk, looking at the wall with the letter on it. She was in her 70s, perhaps. With silver hair and the upright bearing of someone who had once been very beautiful and knew it. She was reading the letter slowly, moving her lips slightly with the Hebrew. When Sarah approached, the woman turned. Her eyes were broad. "Her misery," she said, pointing at the wall. "He was my grandfather's cousin." She looked at Sarah. Are you the young woman who found the letter?" Sarah felt something move through her chest. "Yes," she said. "I'm Sarah Cohen, his great-great-granddaughter." The woman looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached out and took Sarah's hand in both of hers. The way old women do when words are insufficient. And she held it. They stood together in the lobby of the Mizrahi Grand Hotel. The two of them on a Tuesday morning in spring. And the light came through the high windows and lay itself down across the limestone floors in pattern that looked like something. Written language no one had formally named. Later, Sarah would think about what it meant that a story beginning in humiliation had arrived here, in this handclasp, in this light. She would think about the woman who had made assumptions in a hallway, and the man who had made worse ones. And how both of them had been changed by the collision with something they hadn't expected to find. She would think about her mother pressing linens in other people's hotels, about Avner Mizrahi standing in front of his first booth squinting into the future. About all the quiet work done in all the invisible spaces between one generation and the next. She would think. Every person you dismiss without looking at them is a story you will not get to know. Every assumption you make about what someone is worth, based on a stain on a collar or a tray in their hands or a uniform they've been given, is a door you close before it has a chance to open. And then she would go back to work. Because there were guests arriving. And they were all carrying the weight of their journeys, and that was the whole of hospitality, and she was good at it, and it was hers. Carfi epilogue. A note to anyone watching. There is something deeply human about this story, something that goes beyond the hotel, beyond the billionaire, beyond the twist of the hidden legacy. It is the story of what happens when a person refuses to be defined by someone else's assessment of their value. It is the story of what quiet, consistent excellence can build when it is pointed in the right direction and sustained long enough. It is the story of what gets lost when we make assumptions without asking, and what becomes possible when we are humble enough to correct them. Daniel Harari walked into a hallway one morning and saw a woman with a coffee tray. And he made a mistake that many powerful people make every single day of their lives. He decided she was not worth paying attention to. He was wrong in a way that still embarrasses him. He will tell you so. He has. But here is the thing about Daniel that the beginning of the story doesn't show. Because the beginning of any story is never the whole of it. He heard himself say those things in the hallway. Not when she answered him in Hebrew. Even before that. He heard himself and felt something shift, some dim discomfort he had been too rushed and too certain to examine for years. The encounter with Sarah didn't just reveal something about her. It revealed something about her. Evie chose, which is the important part, to do something with that revelation instead of letting it pass. That is also a choice people get to make. Sarah, for her part, is not a saint. She is ambitious. Sometimes impatient, occasionally more certain she is right than the evidence fully supports, and constitutionally incapable of leaving a detail unattended. She will tell you this herself. She has a complicated relationship with legacy, with the weight of a name she inherited, and a story she didn't ask for. And she is still working out, year by year, how much of that weight to carry and how much to set down. But she opened the doors. That is what she did. Every morning, she opened the doors. And every morning, the people came in carrying the weight of their journeys, and she was there to welcome them, not because she had to be. Because she had decided, a long time ago, that this was what she was for. Her mother would love the floors,